Florida goes into Tuscaloosa, gets a 99-94 win over the Crimson Tide. They were up by as many as 14 in the second half. Alabama had a late surge to at least make it respectable. I don't know about you, Subi, but I kind of felt like Florida was in no danger to lose this game. Even in the first half, I think Alabama went up by 5, and it just it felt like Alabama's really good. That's no disrespect to them at all. I think that they, I wouldn't be surprised if they make it back to the Final Four, could even win a national title if things break right. But I just think the depth that Florida has, the size and the shooting elevates them another level to where even when Bama was up, I was like, man, you got to get more separation than that on this Florida team. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The two biggest thoughts I had watching this game, number one, this was a national champion type of performance from the Gators, and I'll tell you what, folks, we've seen three of them now this season, smashing Tennessee, smashing Auburn on the road, going into Tuscaloosa, and pulling out this victory.
Mhm.
Like, don't overthink it, and I'm going to overthink my bracket, but when I see Florida, I'm just going to be like, I've seen them play like a national champion three separate times.
Mm.
Like they've made mincemeat of the Vols defense. Um, Auburn, they went into the jungle and won, and then Bama, they took care of business. That was the first thing that came to my mind. Second thing, Riley, was I was really wrong about this game in the preview, and I'm going to own up to that. I thought Grant Nelson was going to have a nice game. He did not. 10 points, 4 rebounds, just not going to get the job done, man. And then I don't know. There were a lot of other Mark Sears had 30, but a lot of those he got bottled up in the second half for the most part. But just I was wrong about a lot. But what I will say that is so evident, and if you don't know it yet, come to terms with it. Florida's next gear, their top gear, I suppose,
Mm.
is untouchable. I'm confident in saying that it is untouchable. No one's reaching that in the entire country. I'm comfortable saying that. Riley, it was touch and go. It was a battle for a minute, and then it was 14, and then that was the ball game.
They just I mean, they're so good getting out in transition. I think they said they're either are they first or second in the SEC. Maybe it was even the country. I can't remember the exact stat from the broadcast and fast break points. But that's just that's how their spurt ability would be the buzzword to use. But that's how they're so dominant when it comes to kicking it up another gear. I mean, even looking in this game, the Gators had 22 fast break points compared to just 10 for Alabama. And I know Alabama's supposed to be this run and gun team. That's what Nate Oates has built his whole philosophy and his whole reputation on. And Florida took that style and perfected it. It's like, okay, you do this great. Man, what's a good analogy for this? I should have thought about this going into it. It's like it's like okay, the food scientists over at McDonald's, you do a quarter pounder great, but then Gordon Ramsay takes it and he perfects it. He turns it into an art,
I
elevates
like
it.
that.
When it comes to a burger, for instance, or something like that's this. Yeah, I like this Florida team. They're just a machine, and when they start getting stops too, and I'm just so impressed with this team fundamentally defensively. Like Condon was huge in this game. I honestly can't believe you mentioned Grant Nelson. He had 10 points. I felt like he would have had 4 and I wouldn't have been surprised. He went 4 for 10. I swear it felt like he was like 2 for 15 because Condon dominated that matchup. And when he goes to the bench, it's like there's no drop off when Micah Henlockton comes in. He's been so good defensively since returning from injury. And when they start getting those stops, when they're blocking shots, they're getting out in transition. I mean, even Ruben Chinyelu, who had that block in the first half that led to the run out for Elijah Martin, is like the size. They're just so good at cutting teams off at the basket. I mean, another stat I think they said on the broadcast, Alabama started 1 for 7 on layups in this game. That like it's they're just really, really well rounded and good at just about everything.
Dude, it's a gutter war when you enter the paint against Florida. And I actually tweeted this. I said, look, I know Florida's a really good defensive team. It was on display, but they're allowed to play real physical. And this isn't me saying that I want the refs to call it tighter. It's more of
Mm.
me saying we watch a lot of college basketball and I see a lot of teams trying to emulate what Florida does and they get called for fouls. There were a few possessions in this game. And again, I loved it, but we're so conditioned now, Riley, to be like any sort of contact. Oh, of course, these awful refs are going to call a foul. But there were a few possessions where I was just like, golly, I want to be anywhere in the entire world except that painted area in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, man. And Florida just they were just a lot tougher down there. And you should take a victory lap on your preview highlighting Alex Condon. He had a career game, right? This wasn't just another solid performance. This was a career game from him. And then Walter Clayton Jr. was steady as well, more than steady. He was great too. The law firm of Clayton and Condon really set the tone for them. I think they both had over 20 points. Those two guys were awesome. And then there were a few times also where they just hit timely threes. Like Florida does
Mhm.
every time you might try and they probably could have closed the game better, but Bama got a few offensive buckets and all they needed was a stop, and no one's writing home on Bama's defense. I get that.
Right.
But Florida would hit a back-breaking three, like Thomas Houck would hit a three, and you're just like, where can we stop these guys? And
Yeah.
it's just really difficult.
Or it was even, yeah, I love that you mentioned the 3-point shooting. It's the same thing. Like, I mean, I attribute that a ton to Florida dominating the offensive glass. I mean, they had 16 offensive boards in this one. Compare that, actually, not as much of a discrepancy as I expected. 10 offensive boards for Alabama, but I think Florida still won the rebounding battle. There, once
I
again,
mean,
apologies.
I think it matters, Riley, when those offensive rebounds came. Like I can
Yes.
think of one right now where I think Bama was up or down 5. Florida missed the front end of a 1-on-1, and Chris Youngblood got beat to the ball.
hmm And or Condon like had a kind of a bad brick, like shooting a little like a I think it was a right-handed hook, but he just immediately got the board and put it back. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter. Um, even like they because especially off those offensive boards, they have such the bigs have such a good feel of when to kick out for the open shooter for those back-breaking threes. Um, Condon only had one assist. Like that's the only thing you can nitpick here.
that's fine. Who cares?
But his one assist, I will say, was disgusting. It was right after Mark Sears hit the three. I want to say it cut the lead to 7, like the closest Bama got in a while in the second half. Sears hit a huge three. Um, Golden scripted something where Elijah Martin cuts back door, Condon finds him for the dunk. Just such a gorgeous offense to watch. Like again, I this Florida team. I'm trying to think of when's the last time I've enjoyed a non-Carolina team this much. Maybe like 2017 Kentucky with De'Aaron Fox and Bam Adebayo. That's like one of my gold standard teams. I'd have to like sit down and really think about it for like. I love 2020 Dayton. 2025 Florida is like right up there with those teams for me.
They're just they play such a brand of basketball that you just want, right? And I'm just sitting there marveling at how physical they're. Like these are grown ass men going for the rebound. Like no pup. If you're a puppy dog, stand on the porch against Florida, man. Like they are going to out rebound you. I mean, you got to bring your hard hat. And I hate Riley, like especially when we talk about the NBA. These are guys that have mastered their crafts. And so people try and say, like, he doesn't box out, like he doesn't play good enough defense, blah, blah, blah. It's like some of these guys are just better. But
Yeah.
what I will say in applying fundamentals when you play against Florida, like you cannot ball watch. You like the Chris Youngblood thing. It sounds really elementary and it might be patronizing to a guy like Chris Youngblood. But when you go up against Florida, it is butt in a gut. Like, do not track the ball when the ball goes up.
Mhm.
Go find a gator, put your ass in his hip, and box out. Like, hopefully you'll get an over the back. These guys are huge anyway. They can probably just get the ball like as is. But I will also my last thing on their
Yeah.
prowess on the offensive glass, Riley. I feel like Florida will generate like 4 additional possessions within 30 seconds. And then maybe that fifth time, it's a genuine fifth offensive rebound, but the ref's just like, this is ridiculous. Like I have to call an over the back or something, and it goes the other way. I feel like I saw that a couple times. Florida was magnificent, though.
Yeah, yeah. I think to your point about that, the physicality and just like how grown this team is. LeBaron Philon is someone I'm a huge fan of. Like I love his NBA potential. I think, he started out the season really high, has kind of tapered off a little bit since then, but turned in a really good stat line tonight. I mean, 3 for 4 from the 3-point line, contributed 19 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. He looks small out there. compared to these Florida guards even. Like it's funny that like Alabama going into the year was oh they're putting length up and down the court. Oh they're starting Jaron Stevenson at the 3, Grant Nelson at the 4, Cliff at the 5. Obviously they've abandoned that. Chris Youngblood kind of makes a lot more sense to put Chris Youngblood in the starting lineup there. But even Sears, I know Sears is a 5-year vet at this point, but you just stack them up to like Walter Clayton has really good positional size. Elijah Martin has always played like a 6'4" power forward, and now that he's being asked to play essentially a shooting guard at six, like I guess 6'2", 6'3", but he's like yoked. I mean, this is they just have. It's not just the front court that's menacing; it's up and down the roster.
I mean, they've
Again,
been and I think the second Todd Golden stepped foot into Gainesville, that he's put a real emphasis on offensive rebounding. This is not the first time
mm,
we've seen their offensive rebounding prowess. They were one of the top offensive rebounding teams last year. Pretty sure they were 2 years ago. They just didn't have the other complementary parts. Like you can't win games just off of offensive rebounding. They are a complete package without a doubt. I guess, Riley, my last two closing thoughts.
yeah.
I wouldn't write off Bama just yet. I wrote off Bama last year because of how hard their defense was. I think they actually have a better defense this year, which might speak to last year's defense. But I think Ralph actually had a great tweet. Like their record from February last year and this year is relatively similar. And I think everyone was just like, they're not a Final Four threat. Like, no way. Alas, see what happens, right?
Mm.
So to your burger analogy, sometimes a McDonald's burger hits. Like it might be midnight and you're drunk and you just want a McDonald's burger, not some fancy like grass-fed burger from Gordon Ramsay. So that's one. But two, just folks, if you take anything away from Florida, it's their next gear. They made going up 14 in Tuscaloosa on senior night light work. Like that happened so quick.
I think those are two great points to end on. Man, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get to. I'll close on Florida, but I totally agree to where I'm not ready to write off Alabama. I still believe in this team's ceiling as like Final Four level. Um, they need more from Aiden Holloway. He was someone we highlighted in the preview. I know he had dealt with a. I think they said it was a face injury. Only played 15 minutes in this one. 1 for 4 from the 3. I don't think he scored a bucket in the second half. He might not have even attempted a shot in the second half. Like he didn't take a single shot in the second half. That's a little bit alarming considering how much like Bama's offense really. I know what the analytics, the points per possession say, felt like they sort of sputtered until they made their late surge. They need more like the front court. I think this might be the issue with like a team with as much depth as they have. Like it still feels like we're in early March and the front court rotation isn't quite settled. You never know what you're going to get out of Cliff Mourier. I mean, I thought Aiden Sherrill was really good off the bench, but I don't know if he's someone who you're going to say like, oh, let's go ahead and turn the reins over to him from Cliff or something like that. I guess you still have a week left to push those buttons and see what happens. But that's still kind of my concern is like, who else can you depend on outside of Mark Sears, like night in, night out? You have a bunch of really good players. There's just a little more inconsistency for my liking. At the same time, I think a team as good as Florida with that second gear, with that defense, which with how well they throw you out of rhythm and then they just extend their possessions with their work on the offensive glass. Like, I mean, it's a nightmare for a team whose front court still kind of doesn't really know what it is. So, yeah, I think it tells us both. It tells us a lot about both of these teams. But I ultimately leave the big takeaway is just like Florida's elite national title good, and I'm going to be very, very hard pressed to not pick them to win it all.
I'm not trying to tip my hand if we're ever in some brackets together, but like I said, I've seen three national champion type performances this season alone.